Thank you very much, Hanson. That's very nice of you. It's great to be with you, even if it's only virtually. I must say, I'd much rather be really with you. I'm missing very much being able to give talks where I can see what reaction I'm getting from the audience. Um, I sometimes even slip in a joke under those circumstances, but I don't think I feel like doing it on a Zoom. It doesn't seem to work somehow. So anyway, I'm going to now share my screen because I'm going to use PowerPoint. So I hope this will work. Okay, I'm hoping that's all right. Please tell me if it's not. As you can see, the title for my talk today, It's Only Words. I think most of you watching are probably too young to remember that there's a song that's called It's Only Words. But I thought I'd put it up there because, partly because talk is sometimes considered rather trivial. People say, oh, it's only talk, or it's all talk and no action, and things like that. And I want to rescue, not just me, but a lot of people want to rescue spoken language from this relatively trivializing position compared with written language, for example. And I want to show that it's really quite crucial. And most of my work has been on talking classrooms, following various lines of inquiry, but as Hanson said, largely to do with looking at how teaching, learning and thinking is carried on in those settings. So I'm going to draw on some of the research I did a while back, but also some very recent stuff to explain why I think talk is important in classrooms today as much as any time. And that the fact that they've been disrupted by the COVID pandemic means we've got to give particular attention to children's use and development of talk. But I think when we get back to something like normal in our schools. I've been talking about this theme. My research on talk, my PhD was on talk. I've been working with teachers closely for many years now on talking classrooms. But I have to say, I'm much more confident about what I can say to you today because in recent years, research has converged in a way that makes the findings more robust, makes it easier and more, one can be more confident in drawing conclusions about what are the implications of research on talk for teaching and learning. And so I'll say something about that. Hold on, it's not working. From relatively recent research in a number of fields, which include neuroscience, psychology, sociolinguistics, and education research, we know some things now, which I used to think I sort of knew, but I feel a lot more confident about. One is that language is now recognized to be an integrated function of the social brain. If you go back and look at some of the work that was done a while ago, for example, the work very closely related to Chomsky's linguistics, Steven Pinker's work, for example, you'll see that language is almost treated as though it's a sort of app stuck on the intelligent brain, a sort of separate thing that works independently. Children learn it because they have a language acquisition device, and it's a sort of self-contained property of human cognition. In fact, we now know it's much more integrated. Lots of reasons. I mean, just for example, one of my colleagues at Cambridge has shown that children who have trouble processing language, some kinds of dyslexia, also have trouble processing rhythm in music. And it's through those kind of things that neuroscience have shown that these things are more connected. Nevertheless, although we know that language has evolved, if you like, to make us humanly possible, in the sense that as humans, we use language to think collectively in the way no other animals can, and we're hardwired to learn language like no other species can, we all nevertheless have to learn how to use it well. We've sacrificed the confidence, certainty of, for example, the bees with their language of dance to show where nectar is, which is hardwired in its entirety into their brains. We sacrificed the certainty of instinct for the possibilities of a greater learning capacity. So we all have to learn how to use language well. And the way we learn it is through interaction by using it. Language is something we learn by use. And so children's competencies are developed through their interactions with others in a way, as Hansen mentioned. I've drawn very much on Vygotsky's ideas and people like Brunner for drawing these conclusions. But also we know that because language is so integrated with cognitive functions, it's very closely related to the development of reasoning, of thinking skills, if you like, and that children typically develop their reasoning skills in the sense of being able to reason alone by, first of all, reasoning collectively with other people. We also know, looking up more into sociolinguistics and research on education and opportunity in society, that levels of confidence and skill in using spoken language really can affect young people's life chances. It's well known, I think, from recent surveys that one of the things that people say is the most scary thing that happens to them in their lives, many people say this, is being asked to speak in public. And so it's something that they don't feel they're able to do. And unfortunately, in many countries and in many schools, they don't get much help in learning how to do that. It's no coincidence, in my view, that most of the politicians who are now in charge of the United Kingdom, England especially, are people who went to what we call public schools, which they're actually the most elite private schools are known as public schools in England. What you might call public schools, we call state schools. So these very expensive public schools, and what do? They train the people there to use spoken language effectively. And lo and behold, they're now all politicians and people like that. So we know these things are important, and I know that research recently has made this much stronger as a set of principles. Let's think about, for example, the language that goes on in children's homes before they even get to school or when they're out of school at home. We know that the amount of conversation and the quality of the conversation that children experience at home is very variable. We know this from research back in America in the 90s, Hart and Ridley, but more recently there's been studies in England, in Britain, which back up this idea that the quality of conversation, of language experience that many children get is much less rich than which other children get. And this variation is a good predictor of how well they tend to do when they get to school and by the time they're in the 13, 14, their teens. So we know this, and this is a terrible thing. I mean, I often say to teachers, isn't this awful? It sounds like children's destinies are set even before they arrive in your classrooms, because it will depend a lot on what kind of language experience they've had at home. But it's not really so terrible as it sounds because of, as I say to teachers, yourselves, you. If you offer those children the chance to develop a full repertoire of talk skills and they get a rich experience of language in school, you can make up for that deficit, for those differences. And when I talk about deficits, I'm not talking about dialects and accents and things and variations in language in that way. I'm talking about using language as a way of making sense of the world. That's what we're talking about here. So it's worth being clear about that. That's what we mean by the quality of conversation. So school offers the only second chance for many children to develop a full repertoire of talk skills, which will see them in good stead for their own learning and also for their working and lives and those of the community. So I'm going to talk about classroom language under two themes, okay, which are like two sides of the same coin, if you like, because you can't really separate them off. Put them in a Venn diagram here, you can see what I mean. One is learning through talk, that is talk, spoken language as the medium for teaching and learning in school. It's what most obviously how teaching and learning happens in schools. It happens in universities as well to some extent, doesn't it? Like that. I mean, this this is essentially a talk event, which I hope you can learn something from. And if I just sat quietly, it wouldn't be happening, would it? So there's looking at the use of talk for teaching and learning. And then secondly, there's learning to talk, that is developing children's spoken language skills, or oracy skills. Because we can't assume that young people have learned all the languages they need to before or outside, they get to school or outside school. So we need to focus on that too. And those two things, as I say, are really two sides of the same coin. So let's look at the first one, learning through talk. The research I've done with my colleagues has been applied research. It's been research concerned with offering practical outcomes, practical guidance to teachers and policymakers in education to some extent as well. And that's what we've done. And what's more, we derive these practical outcomes not by making analogous reference to the ways learning takes place in other settings, which sometimes happens, sometimes done by cognitive scientists. Some of the stuff that comes from cognitive science about how teaching and learning should go on in school is often largely by analogy. You know, this is how experts learn and this is how they become better and so on. But it's not done by looking at what really goes on in school. What we do is to draw out practical implications, essentially, from looking at what the best teachers do that gets the best learning outcomes and other outcomes for their students. And so we've asked this question really, does the way teachers use talk affect the quality of education? Since the 1960s, in fact, really since sound became possible to record sound easily, there's been a lot of research on talk in schools. It was very hard before that, obviously, because you just had this transient medium. And there's been a lot of research which has thrown up in many countries, which has thrown up some very interesting results. And people have been acting on those results for some time. However, one of the criticisms that's been made of such education research is that it's been small scale. It's not been big data research like you get in the medical sciences and so on. And that has been seen by some people as meaning you can't really trust some of the findings. Well, my colleagues Christine Howe and Sarah Hennessy and I decided that we should really see whether the kinds of things that have been shown in the small scale studies stand up in a big data study, whether we can really see that these ideas were really worth, are robust and therefore worth saying policy and practice should be based on them. So let's have a look, for example. There have been research has shown, for example, that talk about literary texts which promote students' comprehension skills has these characteristics. This is in fact from some research done by Wolf, Crossan and Resnick, Lauren Resnick and her colleagues. But there's also, I've mentioned some other research there, which I'm putting a reference list at the end. You can follow any of this up because you'll have the PowerPoint to look at. So anyway, that research has shown, for example, that teachers should do these things if they want to promote students' comprehension skills as a form of learning. They should reformulate and summarize what students say, which provides an opportunity for other students to build on the ideas, encourage students to put the main idea in their own words, and ask them to elaborate their ideas. How did you know that? Tell me more, this kind of thing. So we thought, well, that was amongst the things we thought we'd look for those kind of characteristics in a larger scale study. Well, the study we carried out is the Cambridge Classroom Dialogue Research Project, which was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, which is the main funder of social science research in the UK. And as you can see, it was in relatively recent years. We're still analysing some of the results now. It was large in the sense it was the largest study in primary schools, elementary schools that had been carried out anywhere in the world. In the sense we had 72 teachers in 48 schools. We recorded 3 lessons from each teacher. In the end, we used 2 lessons from each teacher, and they were teaching maths, science, and English. And they were teaching students who were aged 10 and 11. Okay, that's our year 5. Our year 6. And what we found was that we could relate the learning outcomes of those students in those classes to what the teachers did, in the sense that we could correlate the relative frequency of certain sorts of verbal acts, certain ways of using talk in classrooms, to the statutory tests of Maths and English. And we also did some science testing, but there are statutory tests that all 11-year-olds have to take in the UK, and they test them on those school subjects. So we were fortunate in that sense, that we could use these tests. We didn't have to create our own learning outcome tests. And we found that when we looked at what teachers did, the students who got the best results, the most improved results on the statutory test, the teachers did these things. First of all, the teachers got lots of students involved in classroom dialogue, so that they got lots of people contributing to a whole class discussion and discussing each other's ideas. Secondly, this relates back to what Resnick and co found, they encouraged children to elaborate their ideas. Okay. And thirdly, they encouraged the questioning of ideas by students. They got students to sometimes say, well, Tom said that. Do you think that's right? Before we move on, do you agree or do you disagree or whatever? They did those 3 things. And they also organised productive collaborative learning, group work as well. That was another factor that fed in. We used a multi-level form of analysis, statistical analysis, to be able to see which factors could be eliminated. And in that way, we could safely say these things were associated with the learning gains. But I've said at the high up in there, in the text where it says, when teachers did all of these things, that was one interesting finding which no previous study had, which was they had to do them all to get the good results. And leaving the group work one at the moment, let's think of the ones that happen in whole class participation, or whole class interaction between teachers and students. If they achieved high levels of participation in classroom dialogue, but that never involved asking children to elaborate their ideas or question ideas, it didn't work. They didn't get better results. If they got only a few children to elaborate their ideas or question the ideas, it didn't work. So they've got to do all these things. They've got to get lots of children involved, and they've got to be getting them involved to do these kinds of things. Now, that was a unique finding. And I think what it really shows is that we pick these markers of what the quality of talk and interaction in the classroom, but really they were markers of something more general, more contextual, which was these teachers were creating a dialogic climate in their classrooms, which was indicated by these things. But that's why they've all got to happen, because it's not just carrying out one sort of technique, it's having this whole approach, which means you get children actively involved in using spoken language for thinking and learning in a collective way as well as individually. So we found this, and that's something that's there. It's a large-scale study, and we feel confident about those results. Fortunately, at the same time, almost exactly at the same time, another large-scale study was being set up at the University of York in England, which was the study funded by the Educational Endowment Foundation. And this was led by Professor Robin Alexander and Frank Hardman and Jan Hardman at the University of York. And ours was an observational study. They got a similar number of teachers in primary schools, in the year, teaching a year younger than our students. And what they did was, it was an interventional study. They used the same sort of things that I mentioned earlier that have been found in smaller scale studies to be related to positive outcomes in learning in schools. And they trained a set of teachers to teach, as they put it, dialogically. And they had a control group who they just said, get on with life as possible. With our teachers, we just told them all to get on with life as possible. And then we discerned between the teachers as how they'd operated differently. What they did was have the two groups. So it was a controlled study of that kind, controlled comparisons. And what they found was that the teachers they taught also got significantly better results in tests of maths, science, and English than the students of teachers who were not trained. And as the funding body says in their report, which I've given the URL for, it was also suggested by those results that the approach might not only improve their results of those students on curriculum subjects, but also improve their overall thinking and learning skills, which is a Vygotskian kind of point that I made earlier, that through using language actively to make sense of the world, they were learning to reason more effectively. So we've got these two studies happening at the same time, which are both larger than anything that's been carried out anywhere in the world before, and they've got utterly compatible results, okay? Which we can bring down to a few specific points, if you like. Let's look at them in terms of what are the implications of these studies for classroom practice. And as I say, they've built on those other small-scale studies. They're really suggesting that many of the findings of those other studies were in fact robust in themselves. We know from these studies then that available evidence suggests that teachers should do some things. One is, and I'll explain more what I mean by this, they should balance authoritative presentation with interactive dialogue. Okay. Secondly, during whole class discussions, whole class dialogue, they should encourage many students to participate, to question ideas and express their thoughts, elaborate, to reveal their misunderstandings. Next, they should use authoritative presentation contingently to take account of what students do and do not know. So I'll say a bit more what I mean by these things now. Authoritative presentation is something that I've taken from the work of Phil Scott, who's a science education researcher. But it means it's what, in a way, it's what I'm doing now, right? It means you're instructing or informing students about something that they may not know about or they need to know with more precision. So it's a traditional classroom style of a teacher in which the students are meant to sit quiet and listen. And they'll hear it from an expert in a way that they probably wouldn't be able to hear it from anybody else. So that's what we mean by authoritative presentation. And as you'll probably know, there are some people that say that's all teachers need to do. Well, as I say, the results suggest otherwise, because what the results suggest, the research findings suggest, is you need to balance that with interaction in which students are actively taking part in classroom discussions and taking part in making sense of the curriculum, whatever they're working on, through talk. So we need both those things. And so you can't reduce good teaching to either a sort of traditional, just sit quiet and listen instruction, or progressive, oh no, the children should be allowed to make their own curriculum and, you know, and come up with their own ideas. What we're saying is it's neither of those things. It's this careful balance. And that's why the third point there, I say use authoritative presentation contingently to take account of what students do and not know, because if you have interactive dialogue, as a teacher, you'll know more about what the students don't know, and you'll know what they need to be taught. I'm having to work without that kind of knowledge with you. I'm having to make vast assumptions about what you need to know and what you don't, and I might not get it right, because I can't hear what you think already or what you know already. If a teacher hears what students know already, they'll realise, oh, I don't need to do that lesson, or I don't need to go into such detail about that. They're okay on that, but oh my God, they still don't understand that. So that's what I mean by contingent use of authoritative presentation. And then finally, they should integrate teacher-led activity with well-organized collaborative learning, group work. Again, there's been some people who say, oh, group work doesn't work well in my classroom. Well, I'll explain why it probably doesn't work well in your classroom if people think that later. But we know that it actually does really contribute to effective learning across different subjects. Okay, so these are the implications. I'm going to try and explain a bit more detail what they sort of mean, and what it means that we say a teacher should teach dialogically by doing these things, by picking a particular example. Okay, here's a science classroom in a British primary school with this is a year 5 class, in fact, so they're about 10 or 11, and they're working on a module on the solar system. It's part of the curriculum, and it really is, this part of this series of lessons is concerned with why does the moon change shape. What the teacher had done was, first of all, put the students in groups and gave them certain statements, which talking points they're known as, which represent facts or perhaps things that aren't really true about the solar system. And they've got to think in their groups of 3 about whether they agree, disagree, or they're not sure about these on the basis of the lessons they've done so far about the solar system. So at the point we will join them, I won't play the video, I'll just show the transcript. The teacher's bringing them back from their groups to the whole class. And she says, Kaylee, would you read out number 9 for us, which is the talking point number 9. Kaylee says, the moon changes shape because it's in the shadow of the earth. Teacher says, right, what does your group think about that? True. Why do you think that? Because when it's dark, then I'm not quite sure, but we think it was true. Right, people with hands up. Kaylee, who would you want to contribute? Sadie, I think it's false, because when the sun moves around the earth, it shines on the moon, which projects onto the earth. That sounds good. Do you want to choose somebody? Matthew. Well, we weren't actually sure, because we were thinking if the actual moon changes, which it never does, or if it's our point of view from Earth, which it puts us in the shadow. That's a good point, isn't it? It doesn't actually change. It looks as if it changes shape to us. That's a really good point. Now, normally, if I was doing this with you live, I would ask you to tell me some things you think are interesting about that transcript. And you might want to think about that. Is it typical of what you see happening in classrooms? What do you think are any interesting characteristics about it in the light of what I've said? But in the absence of real interaction, I will go through some of the things. One is, as a researcher, I can often tell who's the teacher in a transcript, even if the names aren't there, because nearly all the words are next to the teacher. In this case, they're not. The students contribute more words than the teacher, in fact, together. And some of them take quite long turns, which are often rare in classrooms, but not in some of the best classrooms. So the teacher is giving them long turns, that she's involving several of the students. She gets them to pick somebody else themselves. So she makes sure it's not just her picking the usual suspects. And so she's achieving that. She does eventually in the lesson achieve a high level of participation. She gets them to elaborate their thoughts in the way that we've said was important. You can see what Matthew says there. He's certainly elaborating his thoughts. And she's also getting them to question ideas because, Kaylee thinks that when the earth is dark, I think it was true, the statement, the shadow of this. But Sadie says, I think it's false. So there's some questioning. So she's doing all the things that we think are going to achieve the best learning outcomes. Okay. So those are the kind of things you can see in action that are related to the quantitative results in the big data study. The other thing she did, though, which is interesting, she had them in group work. It was well-organized group work. It fed into this. So that was part of what we wanted. But then what happened next is interesting. I spoke to her after she'd had this session, and she said, I said, how did it go? She said, well, it was okay, but oh God, I've spent quite a bit of time on the moon, and so to speak, and they still don't really understand how the phases work. I'm going to show them with a demonstration. So she set up this demonstration of a globe, a lamp, you can see there, and she has a tennis ball. which is the moon. So the lamp is the sun and the globe is the earth. And she then sat them around, she said, right, put your hands down. I want you to listen now. And some of them still tried to put their hands up, because you can see one there. And she just said, doesn't want their hands up. Look, and then she went through it. If the sun's shining from here, on Earth, what we will see is a big circle, a big shiny moon, right? That's a full moon. However, have a look at this now. What happens if I put the moon here and she moved it round? Is there any light falling from the moon that we'll be able to see from Earth? No. And she continued in that way. So this was authoritative presentation. And if you'd only gone in that lesson, this particular one here, you'd have thought, oh, this is a very traditional way of this teacher works. She just sits them down and tells them things. But it wasn't like that, was it? This is contingent use of authoritative presentation, because she knew what they didn't know. And she could think that this was a valuable thing to do. If she'd done this at the beginning, and they already all of the series of lessons, they already half knew it from last year, it would have been a waste of time. But she was able to use it contingently. And she wasn't afraid to say, no talking, no hands up, just listen. Yeah, because it worked. So this is what we mean by this balance between interaction and instruction, if you like. And that really is related to effective teaching. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the second of my themes, which is developing students' spoken language skills. And ask the question, should schools give more attention to developing spoken language skills? I've used the word oracy skills. I'm the director of Oracy Cambridge, which is a study centre at the university. And I don't know if you know already, but the term oracy was invented by Andrew Wilkinson, who was a professor at the University of East Anglia back in the 60s. The reason he invented the term was he thought that spoken language was seen as trivial compared with literacy. He said we should have something that shows that spoken language is equal to literacy and numeracy when it comes to children's learning. It's important. And so he coined that phrase. It's still not in common use everywhere, but it does achieve that function in a way. It's not just chat or talk. Okay. Well, I think they should be giving more attention to developing young people's spoken language skills, not least for the reasons I said earlier, that for many young people, their home experience won't be, an out-of-school experience won't be sufficient to give them a broad repertoire of spoken language skills they need to carry on life in getting things done in a range of settings. So we've been trying to make quite a campaign. We've even got, there's even a government inquiry into oracy at the moment, which he's just completing, about whether it should be represented more in British schools. Well, why is oracy, why are spoken language skills important? Because they will enable young people to do some things. They'll enable them to teach and to learn. You know, it's one of the things they can do better if they can use it, that tool of language, toolkit of language effectively. They can make speeches and presentations, which I said many people are scared to do if they're not been taught how. They can engage in debates, which again tend to be the privilege of the sort of privately educated in many countries. And they can take part in reasoned discussions. That is, they can actively and effectively get involved in teams, groups, and in meetings to get things done, using language well to think collectively in the way that human beings at their best can to solve problems. And they can engage fully with a wider society. They can take part in community events and they can represent their community in certain ways. So we know these things are important. And it's also, if you learn about spoken language, you can become more critically aware of how it's used to influence and persuade. You can take apart advertisements for things in the way they're presented. You can take apart political speeches that are meant to make you vote one way or another or persuade you of the importance of something, because you'll be more critically aware of how speaking and listening is used in that way to shape people's minds. So this is what we want young people to be able to do. I would hope you would agree. I can't think why not. And many skills are involved in using spoken language effectively. It's not just one skill. The situations require different skills, and as you know, there are different skills. There's the physical skills, there's the grammatical skills, the skills of listening and responding effectively to what's been said and so on. And we've in fact created an oracy skills framework, which I won't go into detail now because I could do a whole session on that, working with the charity Voice 21. And you can look at that. If you just Google oracy skills framework, it will come up. And we've listed under those 4 strands the very many skills that spoken language use involves, not all of which are used in any one situation. But I just thought you might like to know that it's there, and many teachers have found it useful already. And it's being translated into other languages at the moment. So what I want to say is, if it's so important that students, young people, do learn oracy skills, have their repertoire of spoken language skills developed, speaking and listening skills, it should be done in school. And that's because spoken language skills can be taught explicitly. We know this now. It can be done. We see it being done. It's already being done in many places, in many schools, but it's not being done consistently or universally. In some societies more than others. And what does it mean providing oracy education, like you provide literacy education or maths education or physics education? It means explicitly teaching children how to use spoken language effectively across a range of situations. It means that you have to assess their strengths and weaknesses and monitor how well they're doing, as you would with literacy, with teaching reading and writing. And you should encourage the children to use their language skills for learning in every subject, so it becomes embedded in the curriculum. That's what oracy education means, and that's what we're making a big push for. Certainly in the UK at the moment, we're trying very hard to persuade the government, who need a bit of persuading, that this should be something that's put up front in educational policy. And it's also worth saying, when I talk to journalists about oracy, and I sometimes get rung up and asked, to say what I mean, they tend to always assume that we're only talking about debating and making speeches. They think that's what oracy means. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. It means working on skills in using language across the whole range of situations, as well as those. Also, some people think it means straightening out children's language, stopping them speaking in, regional dialect, a black dialect, in an accent that's to do with their native tongue or whatever. It doesn't mean that. We don't have to do those things. We don't need to eliminate children's accents or their dialects. You may want to encourage them to become bidialectal in the same way you might want to sensibly encourage them to become bilingual, able to switch their vocabulary choices to different situations. That would be a skill, but it doesn't mean forgetting who you are or what you speak like in your community. You don't need to lose your accents to get certain, you might not be able to tell, but I've got quite a strong Northern English accent. And yet, look, I've got the job I've got. So it hasn't stopped me in that way. So it means doing some things, but not always what people think it means. We know that spoken language skills enable young people to do these things if they're taught. And I'm going to just focus on one because of the time. I'll just look at one, which relates to them working in groups, which we've also said was an important thing for teaching and learning in classrooms, taking part in reasoned discussions with the teacher or in their own groups. And we've done quite a bit of that, which, again, Hansen mentioned earlier in the Thinking Together research, which we conducted some while back. We know from studies of talking groups, and in the book Into Thinking, which she also mentioned, which I wrote with Karen Littleton, we looked at groups discussing meetings, teams, musicians rehearsing, lots of things in different situations. And we found that there's a universal to this, that talking groups is most productive typically when people do certain things. When they don't just interact, they interthink. When they bring their brains together and do what only our species can do, which is create a mega brain through the use of language and think with this mega brain rather than just individually. And that means following a certain way of operating in a group or a team, which will enable you to do this. And so that's what we really want the people to do when they're in a group, and students in a group in the classroom as much as anything else. We want them to interthink. So what makes a good discussion? Again, when I'm working, if I was working with a room full of teachers now, as I often do, I would say, well, when you're in a discussion in the staff room or in a class, if you're walking around hearing a group discussing, what would you say made a good discussion? And typically, have a think yourself what you think makes a good discussion when you're in one or when you're observing a group of students working together. Think of one or more characteristics that you think would make that a good discussion. Okay. Well, typically they'll come up with these things, that people do these things. Share relevant information. You don't just hang on to it because it's yours. You share it because you think it'll help the group achieve its goal, or the team achieve solve the problem they're trying to achieve. You share relevant information. You engage with each other's ideas in a critical but constructive way. You don't just say, when somebody says something, you don't just say, that's rubbish, because you don't like them. You might not think it's a good idea. You'd say, well, I'm not sure about that, but because I think we need to think a bit more about it. And you give a reason. You'd say, I see what you mean, but I don't think that's going to work for these reasons. So they can then question your reasons and be critical about your reasons. So you've got this interthinking operating in the group. Next, they all participate. You don't just get some people, you must know this. I mean, I've been in meetings in the university where there's some people who are just sitting there or on their phones or something and not really participating. If it's a group or a team that's working together, everybody should participate. And they should be encouraged to do so, not dissuaded by somebody talking over them all the time. And they should check understanding by asking questions. If I don't know what you think, I don't just sit there and wonder. I ask, I say, wait, I don't really know what you mean by that. Can you say it again in a different way? And you build on each other's responses. You don't just listen to what they say and then launch into your own thing. You think, well, what have they said that I can make use of and build on, and we can get somewhere further together? These are all characteristics of an effective team working together. And as we said in the book, Into Thinking, many studies of teams and groups and meetings in government, businesses, sport, lots of places, they often go wrong and come up with some terrible decisions. It can take countries to war and so on, often because they're not really doing these things. They're not doing. They're listening to one person telling them what to do, and or they're letting somebody talk over everybody else or whatever. And what you should do is strive for agreement. Sometimes people say, well, if you want children to work in a group, surely you don't need to make them agree. You can say, let's agree to differ. Well, no, I don't think we can. Because if you're working in a team, you're designing the new iPhone, you can't say, oh, let's just agree to differ. You've got to come up with an iPhone in the end. Likewise, in a group, if you're working on a problem solving in maths, one of my colleague, Christine Howe, she did some research in primary schools in which she got one group of students, some classes of students, I should say, the teacher asked them simply to work together on these maths problems. In the other group of classes, the teacher was asked to say to the students, I want each of your groups to come up with an answer to those problems in the end. You've got to agree on an answer. And what did she find when she analysed the results? The students who've been in groups where they were asked to strive for agreement both got better answers in their groups, and 6 months later they remembered what they'd learned. So that striving for agreement is an important part of interthinking. It means you are really working with a mega brain, with a collective mind. Okay, so this is what makes a good discussion. And it's what we call exploratory talk. It's a term we chose from Douglas Barnes, one of my academic heroes, along with Jerome Bruner and some other ones like that, Vygotsky. Exploratory talk. This is exploratory talk. Is what people are doing in a good discussion in almost any setting. In your country, in America, it's accountable talk, which is a term that Lauren Resnick and her colleagues came up with. It's more or less the same thing, as far as I can see. I think it's a shame we end up with these different terms. I think in many other subjects, you'd end up saying, let's just use one, but we've not got that far, unfortunately. But anyway, accountable talk is more or less the same thing. And so this is what we want to be happening when students are working together in the classroom, just as we do when they're adults working in a team. So we know that. How can you make this happen? Well, we know how because we've tried. And what's more, we know that we don't want what we typically contrast exploratory talk with, which is disputational talk. where you just get things like, yes, it is, no, it's not, well, you're an idiot anyway. And I have to say, that's a very frequent occurrence in classrooms too. And sometimes in university meetings, I have to say too. Disputational talk is not very productive, means nobody shares ideas or tries to reach a common conclusion. You just try and knock the other person's ideas down. It's a masterclass, as you might say, in how not to think. We might not blame both of those people in the photo for it, but that's what it amounted to. So we want exploratory talk more of, disputational talk less of in classrooms, okay? I've done a blog, by the way, on the Oracy Cambridge website about Donald Trunk's rhetoric, in case you're interested. It's up there if you want to have a look. Okay, how would you develop those discussion skills in a classroom? If you look on our website too, you'll be able to see examples of students doing this kind of thing. You go through a set of steps, because we've tried this out as an intervention and it works very well. And teachers tell us that it works well. Again, we've seen teachers do things like this, and then we've just refined it into something that we think we can safely offer to them on the basis of what we've seen as good practice. First of all, use a whole class discussion to raise your students' awareness of how they talk and work together. Get them to say what makes a good and bad discussion. They'll come up with some of the things that are on that list that make up exploratory talk. Doesn't mean they're doing it though, but they will be able to identify some of them. Ask them what makes, go wrong. Well, it goes wrong, miss, because in our group, Trevor just talks all the time and she never says anything, or neither does Michael, this kind of thing. Step 3, pick out the most important features of a good discussion. And by reference to the definition of exploratory talk, which I put up, convert them into a set of what we call ground rules for carrying out effective discussions. Discussion guidelines are sometimes called, which the students should agree to adopt. And then if they're given some well-designed group work tasks, you can get them to try using those ground rules. And at the end of each task and at the end of a week, you can say, well, we're going to not look at just how well you did in those maths or science tasks, but how well your discussions went. So you can have 2 parallel kind of learning goals there, the science and oracy skills. And you can talk to them about it. And the ground rules can be put up on the wall, like this is one teacher put up, which are effectively a child-friendly definition of exploratory talk. And you can see she's put up a couple of sort of kind of model examples of how you can speak there, which you hear the students using at first till it becomes normal. And over about 10 weeks or so, it does become normal. And they start using it in a natural way, exploratory talk. And if you ask them, they say, yes, things are better in our discussion groups. And you can see it as an observer when you go in those classrooms, that the quality of discussion has seriously improved. If there's one thing I think a teacher could do to improve the quality of collaborative work, it's set some ground rules for group discussion. And when teachers say, oh, I don't do group work anymore because it just didn't work, I say that's because they weren't taught, your students weren't taught how to do it. You didn't say, oh, I tried to get them to do long division. It didn't work. They couldn't do it. So I stopped. Because you taught them, didn't you? Or a science experiment, how to do one. You wouldn't say, do a science experiment. I'm sure you can work it out. But you expect them often to just discuss. They need to be taught because reasoned discussion might not be a common experience for many children outside school. So how would they know how to do it unless you help them as a teacher? And as I've said at the bottom, if you want to look at a video of a teacher rehearsing these kind of rules in a real classroom, it's again, you'll see it on our website. So this is the way we know one of those kinds of sets of skills, oracy skills, can be developed. We've got other systematic ways of teaching how to make speeches more effectively, how to help somebody to learn something more effectively, and so on. But I've just focused on this because it overlaps more with the teaching and learning in classrooms kind of theme as well. Okay, so what happens? I can tell you that if a school does focus on making most of talk in classrooms, these things are likely to happen. We see them happen. We're working with groups of schools in the UK, in Australia, in Dubai, various other countries. And these kind of approach is being used by other people in other places as well. And we know that it gets these kind of results. You get students to participate more actively and more effectively in their own education in the classroom. That they learn how to use spoken language to get things done. They learn how to use this toolkit of spoken language. They become better at reasoning because Vygotsky was right. Language is a key to converting, if you like. As he said, once a child learns language, their thinking is transformed forever. And it's through the use of language that they become able to reason, and not just together in a group, but it carries on into their own reasoning when they're alone. And you get higher attainment in, as I've shown in those large scale studies, in English, science and maths. So that's really it from me. I hope it's been clear, and I hope what I've said can be seen to apply to classrooms in your experience as well as those in mine. I've put some links up there you can look at, and there's a bibliography at the end as well. So you can, when you get the PowerPoint, you can chase up these things if you wish. But I hope that made sense, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Mercer. So we're going to go ahead and start the Q&A section. So there are already some questions in the Q&A box. So feel free to type more and send questions our way. So the first question, would you, let me just, okay,
Is that okay now? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, you're very welcome. You described, in quotations, high levels of participation as children contributing to discussion.
Yeah.
How do you account for students' embodied actions in thinking about participation?
I'm not quite clear what the question means. I think I'll have to ask for some elaboration, as you might say. I'm not quite sure what's meant by embodied action. If somebody can, if that person can perhaps elaborate what they mean a little, I will happily answer the question.
Yeah, so maybe we can wait for a little bit and we'll move on to the next one first.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for this really interesting talk. I was thinking about a connection between two large-scale studies you described on teacher talk and the effect of teachers' use of dialogic teaching. What do you think about the efficacy of using classroom discourse data, that is real examples of teacher talk, to train teachers how to teach in a dialogic way or otherwise?
I think that's a very good thing to do. We do that at Cambridge in the teacher training course that we have there. We have training courses for primary and secondary teachers, and we use examples from research studies. There's a site which I think is on the list there, which is the Cambridge Educational Dialogue Research Group, and there's lots of stuff up there about that, and it's been put up there specifically so that people can use examples from classrooms to train teachers. I think it's the best way. I can tell teachers what I think is a good idea, but I think hearing and seeing other teachers doing it is probably the most effective way of convincing them that it would really work.
Yeah, so here is a clarification from the first question.
Okay.
So by embodied actions, the questioner is referring to eye gaze, posture, gestures, where students can contribute to the discussion with their bodies without speaking.
Yeah. I think those things are important. They can be important. You can see, I mean, from the way you're nodding now, for example, I can tell that you're taking account, that Carol's nodding. I can see that you're taking account of what I'm saying. So they are important. I haven't looked at those things myself. I'm sometimes asked whether I've done any research on non-verbal communication in classrooms. And I just say, it's really important, but life's too short. I've not had time. But there are other people doing it. I was just asked to review a paper recently on it. So I think those things are important, but I don't feel I've got anything particularly technically insightful to say about it.
Okay, here's another question. Thank you for this fascinating talk. I'm wondering if you have done or are aware of studies on supporting and developing oracy in populations where attendance is an issue, or there's interrupted education.
Yes, I am aware of some of those. Some of them I'm aware of from Spain, where I've worked with people in Catalonia in northern Spain, where they've been working with Romani children, with Gitano, gypsy children, um, amongst others, and who's typically, as you know, it's often the case that their attendance is sporadic, and they've managed to achieve some really good results by working more with the community and involving the parents in the school. And certainly that's one of the aims that many schools in some areas in the UK have been trying to develop too, to get the parents involved, or at least helping the parents see what they can do to contribute as well to that oracy development. I think it's an important but a difficult area to work in often, but it's certainly being done and being done effectively. Again, if somebody wants to email me, I can send a reference to the Spanish studies, which I think are some of the most interesting and developed ones that I know about.
Okay. So here's another question. Can you talk a bit about the relationship between your work and to that of Douglas Barnes? Because you mentioned that Douglas Barnes is one of your heroes.
Yeah, I will. Let me just do something. Here's a picture of me and my wife Lynn and Douglas Barnes and his wife on Hampstead Heath in London, right? He's one of my heroes and he's still around. I haven't seen him recently, obviously, because we're not able to see anybody. But I'd like to have another walk with him. His work was massively influential on me. My PhD study was actually a psycholinguistics study. It was done in a laboratory on spontaneous speech, but it was kind of, it was that kind of cognitive science kind of stuff, psycholinguistics, carried out in a laboratory, really. And it was reading work like his that made me feel I wanted to work in an applied area of psychology, and that was why, and education was the thing. He came up with this idea of exploratory talk. He wrote a chapter in the book, which is on the list, exploring talk in school, and I think he worked a lot with American researchers too in that early period, and I think he was one of the most influential people at that time for making people see that spoken language in classrooms wasn't trivial. And we're now awarding a teacher on one of the courses for oracy lead teachers in the UK, which Voice 21 run. We now offer each year the Douglas Barnes Prize for the teacher who has done the best applied assignment in the classroom on developing oracy. I should just say, if any of you have heard of Monty Python, the comedy sketch, this picture was taken by one of Monty Python who just happened to be there, Terry Jones. Yeah, there you are. So it's a really good picture. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I guess you really miss having a walk with him or
Yeah,
talking
definitely,
to him.
yeah.
Yeah. So here's the next question. Thank you for this really insightful talk. I'm wondering what counts as the evidence of students interthinking during the group discussion.
I think that we have a way of analysing the talk, which we call sociocultural discourse analysis, and I've written about this. What we would do is, by looking through the discussions, we would look for indications of how they are enacting those things that make up exploratory talk. So we'd want to see clear evidence that a student is responding to another student, and that probably that can be done sometimes by looking at repetition. That one student introduces a term or a concept and it's picked up by another student. You want to see them asking questions so that they were to find out what the other students thought. You want them giving reasons to justify why they're arguing for a certain position, and you want the other students responding to those. So you've got to do this careful interaction analysis. Often talk when we talk about exploratory talk or disputational talk, we're not saying any one whole discussion will be just that. It might start off disputational and then they get better at it, or the other way around, but it can move. Exploratory talks are kind of ideal that you can see as to what extent is it being enacted in this discussion by looking for those features of interaction. And it's not that difficult, really. We also found like a quantitative way of doing it that worked surprisingly well was simply to count up the number of becauses and ifs that you actually got in a discussion. And they correlated very strongly with how exploratory the talk was in the students' discussions. So there are ways, it's not that difficult, and teachers themselves can become quite adept at listening to a discussion and seeing whether they think it's exploratory or not, or accountable in the American term.
Right. Here's another question. Do you have any conversation analysts on your team? Your thoughts on whether conversation analysis can bring anything to your projects?
I think it can. We've drawn quite a bit on conversation analysis, and Derek Edwards, that I wrote the first book I wrote with which was mentioning common knowledge, he moved much more into that area than I did, but he certainly had a strong influence. And there are people like Liz Stokoe, who's written books on that, using that approach entirely, which I certainly recommend to students. Well, I think what we've done is we've been sort of magpies. We've taken bits of conversation analysis, we've taken bits of Hallidayan linguistics, bits of more of Chomskyan linguistics, bits of sociolinguistics, and we've used those all to create a sort of way of looking at classroom talk that draws on those different traditions, because I think they often are very compatible elements which you can bring together. And I think conversation analysis is one of the things we've taken from it, is that you cannot really tell the meaning of a term unless you know what came before it and what comes after. And yet lots of earlier classroom research was based on verbal acts, speech acts. So you simply took speech acts as isolated units, and you can't. That doesn't do justice to talk. And that's, I think, one of the biggest. The other thing we took from conversation analysis, the early stuff, was the notion of ground rules, which is this idea that there is these implicit norms that influence how you operate in any situation, which often aren't made explicit. Like in a traditional classroom, a ground rule normally is, if the teacher asks a question, she's wanting, as a student, you should provide a short, correct answer. If you don't know that short, correct answer, do not speak. That's a ground rule. Now, it might not be a good ground rule, but lots of classrooms operate that way. Likewise, if you go into a shop to buy something, it's you who has to. One of the ground rules is you have to say what you want. You can't just stand there and expect somebody to come up to you. There are lots of ways that you can. If you go for a job interview, they can ask you why you want the job. It would be breaking the ground rules to say, "Oh, why did you want your job?" You would say it's funny. And people like Harvey Sachs and people and Harold Garfinkel in the early stages of conversation analysis made those points clear. It became visible to us in a way it hadn't been before. So I think it's a pretty important tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, a long answer. Yeah.
This is a great answer because I do conversation analysis. Could you elaborate on what kind of home? This is a long one, but it's a really good question. Could you elaborate on what kind of home/caregiving interactions in early childhood are considered helpful or harmful for children's later school performance, and based on what evidence? So the question continues. In the US, the so-called language gap attributed to lower socioeconomic status families and families of color has been decisively critiqued. And I think all the way back to Shirley Bryce Heath's and Susan Phillips' work, which found mismatches between the home communicative socialization patterns of different communities and what schools rewarded. But their point was that it was schooling that needed to change, rather than assuming that families were the problem. What is your perspective?
I agree with all of that. I agree that it's certainly not easily related certainly not to ethnic groups or social groups. As I said in my talk, there's a horrible tendency for some people to assume when I say oracy education, oh, you're going to teach them to speak properly, are you? Or, you're going to make up for what they didn't get at home. Well, it isn't a matter of social class really either. What we know is there are certain ways that if parents interact with younger children, and Shirley Bryce Heath was making this point partly as well, is that they're just going to help children make more sense of the world. And we've got examples from, not me, but my colleagues in Cambridge, examples of people from very similar socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnic groups, different parents operating very differently. The parent goes with the child to the park, for example, and there's some ducks in the park. And the child says, "Oh, look, Mum, there's some ducks." "Yeah," says the mum. He says, "Oh, look, that one's running off. That's flying off, that duck." "Yeah, come on, let's go and sit down." And it goes on like that. Another mother comes in, or father comes in. Child says, "Oh, look, Mother, there's some ducks over there. Mum, there's some ducks over there." And she says, "Oh, look, are they the ones we saw before, do you think? Are they the same colours?" "No, Mum, those ones were green and brown. These ones are all white." "Oh, right, so they're not the same ducks. There must be two kinds of ducks. What do you think do you think the ducks stay here all the time?" "Oh, I don't, well, did we see them when the winter was here?" "No, they weren't here then, Mum, were they?" Right. What they've found is when parents have had those kind of what they call elaborative conversations with their children, if you ask the children what happened at the park the next 2 or 3 days, the first child will probably have nothing to say, might not even remember seeing the ducks. The second one will say, "Oh, we saw some ducks and we realized that there were two kinds of ducks." And so it's that kind of conversation, which isn't anything to do with social class, which is really helpful. It's a Vygotskian notion of getting the child to use language to make sense of the world collectively with somebody else. That's what we really want to happen. And anything that focuses on these other social indicators is probably a red herring, as you might say. It's that kind of thing we want to look at. And unfortunately, children from various backgrounds won't get that conversation at home. And that's where school or nursery school comes in. If they're not going to get it there, they're not going to get it. And so I think there's no point denying that some children from different backgrounds are going to not all have as rich a language experience outside school, and that schools ought to make up for that. But to reduce it to simplistic notions of families of different groups and stuff is really a distraction. It won't solve the problem.
And I think that's probably all of the questions. Oh, here's another one. Thank you so much for your inspiring and thought-provoking presentation, Neil. Throughout your presentation, you stated many activities and strategies that teachers can use to make their teaching more effective. Do you think using these activities and strategies can yield similar results if they are not framed under an overarching teaching method that may ensure a methodic reiteration of these strategies in a goal-oriented manner? Project-based method as an example.
Yeah, I don't. If I've understood the question right, I don't think it can just be. I don't think if people just methodically and literally carry out a series of actions or activities, it will have the right result. As I said, when we looked at what we found in that large scale study, we felt that the particular actions we found were indicative of the kind of things teachers did that got better results. They were more really indicative of a teacher having a whole style which was dialogic, and they were indicators of it. It wasn't that they did three things, and it was that they thought about language in that way and used it that way, either self-consciously or otherwise. So I think, yeah, if I've understood the question right, no, it can't be reduced to simply applying those things. You've got to be applying those things because you know why you're doing it, and what the whole underlying principles are, really. I think that's why I think teacher training, teacher education has to be based on a theoretical, if you like, perspective, as well as a practical, sort of literal one of technique. I think it's vital.
Yeah, thank you. So that's all the questions for today.
Right.
So I'm just gonna maybe wait for 10 more seconds if there are no more questions. I'm going to make an announcement that there were 2 more talks coming up in our LANSI virtual lecture series. So I just want to make sure that you guys are aware. Um, So it looks like there aren't any more questions. So please join me. Neil, I just want to let you know that there are a lot of people thanking you in chat for your talk today. So I'm going to clap on behalf of everybody. We talked about this lonely clap in the beginning of the talk. So thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. I hope that you'll continue to stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you in our future talks. Thank you so much, Neil, for giving a talk today, and thank you for your discussion. This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.